And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers. Mick Cornett is not here with us today, but we'll be back shortly. We're going to talk today about the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. I can remember a time when it did not include the phrase "under God." That phrase "under God" has been challenged constitutionally, and there is at least one recent decision that says the inclusion of that phrase "under God" is unconstitutional. We're going to have a debate about that today of sorts between two people who know. You're watching The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers. We'll see you in just a minute with the debate.
For one Oklahoma-based company, success didn't happen overnight. Initially, the days were long, 80-hour weeks common. As we grew, we wanted to share our success, and the ideals of corporate and civic responsibility found a welcome home. Today, we're the largest investor in the Sooner State and a source for exciting, new, high-quality jobs. We're Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Hi, I'm Court Diffie. With all of the change that has taken place in the car industry in the past decade here in Oklahoma, it's hard to find a family-run business anymore. One of the things that makes us different, that if you visit any one of our 3 locations, you're going to find one of our family members there ready to help you. Does that really make any difference? We really believe it does. So I invite you to come out and experience the Diffie family difference and decide for yourself.
Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers. Mick Cornett will be back with us next show, I believe. We're today talking about the phrase "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance and have 2 constitutional law experts to visit with us about that, and they don't necessarily agree on whether or not the insertion of the phrase "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance is constitutional or not. Let me introduce them to you. On my right is Michael Scaperlanda, professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. Michael is an expert in constitutional law. He had his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Texas. He was in private practice. He's been at the University of Oklahoma College of Law now for 16 years, and this is his 3rd appearance on The Verdict. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Glad to have you back. On my left is Rick Tepker. Rick is a professor of law also at the University of Oklahoma and also an expert in constitutional law. He did his undergraduate work at Claremont College, his law work at Duke. At Claremont, he was a member of Phi Beta Kappa. At Duke, a member of the Order of the Coif. He's been at OU for 24 years, and this is his 2nd appearance on The Verdict. Rick, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
We're pleased to have you both. Let's get right into it, but Michael, give us a little background on how the Pledge of Allegiance, as all our viewers know it, got started. Why do we have one?
Well, as I understand it, the Pledge of Allegiance was written in the late 1800s, late 19th century, by a socialist by the name of Francis Bellamy. It did not include the phrase "under God" in it initially.
And he was a Baptist minister, was he not?
That I don't know.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure about that. During the next few decades, it gained acceptance throughout the country in schoolhouses and has been a source of patriotism. During the Spanish-American War, it was used a lot by school children.
Well, Rick, let me turn the question to you about how, why, and when did the phrase "under God" get inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance? I know you guys can't remember reciting it before it was there. I hate to tell you I can, but go ahead, tell us how that happened.
Well, I can't remember. At least that's the story I'm sticking to today. It was in the 1950s. President Eisenhower heard a sermon after a number of years of effort by the Knights of Columbus and other organizations to change the to change the pledge. The minister, a Presbyterian minister, said that he was very concerned because he thought the pledge as written was something that could be recited by school children in Moscow with the same degree of passion, and it wouldn't mean something that was altogether different. About a decade earlier, a similar concern animated a change in the Pledge of Allegiance. I believe you have a graphic that shows this. That's a Pledge of Allegiance in 1942 in Connecticut, when there was a lot of litigation going on. Those dedicated organizations, the Parent Teachers Association and the Boy Scouts, complained about that particular form of the pledge, which required an extended hand outward, and said it looked too much like the Nazis. Decade later, something similar was happening, and the solution was to include the words "under God," and regrettably, tragically, President Eisenhower signed it with words that are going to haunt the government as they defend this. From this day forward, millions of our school children will daily proclaim the dedication of our nation and our people to the Almighty. The solution for the tyrannical appearance of the pledge in its form was to turn it into a school prayer.
So are you suggesting that the Declaration of Independence still haunts us too, with the reliance of our rights on the Creator?
Of course not, and you know it.
Well, this case has been brought up recently by a plaintiff named Michael Newdow, or Newdow. Michael, what do we know about him, and what's the status of his claim?
Well, he's as I understand it, and this is just reading accounts of it, he's an atheist and father who brought suit 2 or 3 years ago on behalf of his daughter, I believe, saying that this was a prayer. There's reasons why it's not. I'll get to that later. And ultimately lost in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court punted, really, saying that he didn't have standing to bring suit. If I remember correctly, the mother had custody and the father didn't. He's resurrected his suit now with parent, as an attorney also, with parents who have custody of their children and are opposed to saying the pledge.
So this is the same plaintiff that brought whose case reached the Supreme Court
Right.
in the past, and the court said we don't have to decide it because this plaintiff doesn't have standing.
That's correct.
Now, the lower court decision on the second time around came to the conclusion that the pledge was unconstitutional, did it not?
That's right.
With the phrase "under God"
Right.
in it. You've read that opinion. Did that judge sound like he was very happy about that?
No, I don't think so.
What did you glean caused him to come to that conclusion in the case that's just been decided?
Well, I think one of the problems, and we'll talk about this, and I think this is an area where Professor Tepker and I are going to agree on a little bit later, but one of the problems is if you look at the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in the religion area, it says that the nation governments have to be neutral as between religion and non-religion, and the phrase "under God" in the pledge isn't neutral as between religion and non-religion, and so the conclusion could be that the pledge, as stated, is with the words "under God," is unconstitutional.
Rick, let me ask you to step back a little bit from what we've been talking about and just tell our viewers in very general terms, when we say "under God" being unconstitutional, perhaps, what portion of the Constitution does it violate?
If it violates the Constitution, it would be the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment as incorporated in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is what binds the states. The basic idea is this practice, daily recital of the Pledge of Allegiance with the words "under God" in it, represent a governmental strategy to promote endorsement, obedience, dedication to the Almighty as a matter of local school policy.
Now, in California, as I understand the case, there is a California law that mandates the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance with that in there. I mean, in public schools,
But you have
it's
to be careful
required.
about that.
Okay.
The teacher must lead it. The teacher cannot plead rights of conscience and say, this is against my principles or my religion. The teacher must lead it. The students are not required to recite it.
Oh, okay.
They can either sit down or step out of the classroom. And that emanates from a 1943 case, in part inspired by that image you saw earlier, in which the United States Supreme Court, in the middle of our greatest struggle against tyranny, said it is not consistent with our principles of liberty to mandate students to pledge allegiance to the flag.
Well, Michael, if they don't have to say it, how can it be unconstitutional?
Well, because if the teacher's leading it,
Yes.
and the teacher is forced to lead it and forced to promote this idea, the Supreme Court's reasoning, if the Supreme Court were consistent, and I don't agree with the Supreme Court's reasoning, we'll get to that later, but the Supreme Court's reasoning would say that the state cannot promote the view that we are a nation under God.
Okay. Thank you, guys. We're going to get to a break, and when we come back, folks, what we're going to do is have a little different format. I'm going to give Michael about 2.5 minutes to say why the phrase under God should be held to be constitutional in the pledge, and then give Rick about the same amount of time to say why it should not, and then we will ask you at your convenience to go to our website and vote, register your opinion on whether it should be constitutional or not, and then we will announce the results on a subsequent show. So with that little introduction of what's to come, the debate is about to begin. Let's take a break for our sponsors to have some time. You're watching The Verdict.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins in to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
R.S.M. McGladrey. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. R.S.M. McGladrey. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
We're back. I'm Kent Myers here on The Verdict, and today we're talking about under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and whether or not that is constitutional with Michael Scaperlanda and Rick Tepker. Now let's get to the discussion of actually what these gentlemen think about this proposition. Michael, about 2.5 minutes on why under God in the Pledge of Allegiance is constitutional. Go ahead.
Or should be constitutional.
Should be constitutional.
First of all, there's, and I think Professor Tepker alluded to this, that there's some misunderstanding. Some people suggest that saying the pledge with the words under God is a form of worship. I don't think it is. It's an acknowledgement that a majority of the people or a group of people or the nation believes that our rights are dependent upon God. And so I don't think it's a form of worship. And as you mentioned earlier, school children don't have to say it if they don't want to. But the real question, for me anyway, going forward into this next century is, are we a nation where our rights are secured and inalienable because they're given by a creator? Or are we a purely secular society where rights are given by the state? And that's a key question, and that's actually why the pledge was changed in the 1950s to put under God in the Constitution, or in the pledge, was to distinguish ourselves from communists and the communistic atheism. James Madison said in his memorial remonstrance, before any man can be considered as a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. And that's one thing that he did say, and whether he said other things or not, we need to reflect upon why he said that. James Madison said, and can the liberties of the nation be thought secure when we have removed them from their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are a gift from God? These two, who are often the champions of separation of church and state seem to understand that our rights, our liberties are secure when they are looked at as gifts from the transcendent and not gifts from the state or licenses from the state. George Weigel, and I wanted to just mention this book, George Weigel, The Cube in the Cathedral, Europe, American Politics Without God, is a very easy read.
30 seconds.
Very easy read that explores what happens to a society that operates without God as the source of our rights, of our dignity.
Thank you. Rick, you have about the same amount of time to respond and why you believe the insertion of the phrase under God is unconstitutional.
First, in order to live up to the principles from Mr. Madison and Mr. Jefferson, which Mike quoted accurately, one has to remember what they believed derived from those principles. And it was, one, religion should never, ever be an engine of civil policy. That's also in the memorial. And in Madison's phrase, each person should worship God as only that person chooses to worship God. From that principle, we get a principle that government must remain neutral before different individuals' expression or rejection of God. I have no problems with what Madison, Jefferson, or Professor Weigel said. Indeed, I would endorse it. The best way to honor them is to recognize that original purpose of the Establishment Clause. What does that mean here? It means that we should not be having ritualistic, patriotic exercises that remind our ministers and our civic leaders of the rituals of totalitarian governments, whether they be Soviet or Nazis. The history of the Pledge of Allegiance is actually history of dividing Americans and forcing children to acts of conscience every morning of every school day, and that's wrong. My fundamental belief is that the only way to uphold the basic principle of the Establishment Clause, that government should not be in the business of telling us what to say or believe about religion, is to keep such ceremonies out of the curriculum. What would I do? If I was a teacher, I would assign the Pledge of Allegiance to school children, ask them to write essays about what it means, or to ask about what the meaning of Abraham Lincoln's phrase, "This nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom." I believe in teaching that history. I just don't believe in the ritualistic, patriotic exercise, which to me is utterly inconsistent with any American conception of liberty.
Thank you, Rick. Folks, you've now heard the arguments for and against. I want to have each gentleman now with as much time as you'd like, a minute or so each, to give us your prediction of how and when this case gets to the Supreme Court, how it's going to be decided, and why. And I'll go back to Michael and say, what do you think the Supreme Court's going to do with this, and why?
I would assume that the Supreme Court will find a way to uphold under God as constitutional in the pledge. I'm not sure they can do it in a principled way because their prior precedents suggest that the government has to be neutral as between religion and non-religion, as Professor Tepker said. But the political cost to the court of striking down the pledge would be so great, or the under God portion of the pledge would be so great. I think they will try to avoid it once again. They might. There's a doctrine of ceremonial deism that basically if we don't really believe what we're saying, it's okay to say it, and which I think would be the worst outcome. But it could be that they say, well, we just say this as a public ritual. All the excesses that Professor Tepker talks about, and I think Professor Tepker is really talking about the whole pledge and not just the under God portion. They might come down and say, we don't really mean this stuff and therefore it's okay, which I think would be a terrible result.
Rick, what do you think?
I'm not optimistic. Clarence Thomas, in one of the opinions in Newdow, said that in his view, the daily recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance is a more serious breach of the Establishment Clause than some of the other cases where the court had acted. Nevertheless, given the reaction to the Ninth Circuit opinion, when no politician in America would come to the defense of the court, There's simply no one speaking as eloquently as Madison and Jefferson once spoke on these issues. I believe the just principles in this case are going to be left politically undefended. And I suspect Mike is right. And tragically, that might mean they uphold it while at the same time pretending, I think disingenuously, that this has nothing to do with religion, that Eisenhower's words aren't to be believed, and something like this ceremonial deism is a legitimate policy in the land.
Let me ask you both this, or start with Michael and see if we can get a reaction to it. I noticed that there's been a suit filed in Stillwell, Oklahoma now on the Ten Commandments. Both of you guys were with us in a prior verdict show on the Ten Commandments. Any thought about, just real quickly, any thought about that?
Those 10 Commandments were added recently, if I remember, and so I suspect there the court might hold against the county and require those to be removed. I think that would be wrong, as I said before, but the Supreme Court's spoken on that.
Unless the Supreme Court reverses its precedent, recent religion-driven erections of those kinds of monuments are unconstitutional, and rightly so.
That's about all the time we have, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. I encourage our viewers to get on our website, go to the opinion polls section, and vote whether you think Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance, the website has just been pulled up for us, I see, whether or not you think the phrase Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance is constitutional or not, and we'll announce the results. Our thanks to Michael Scaperlanda and Rick Tepker once again for joining us. You've been watching The Verdict, and I'll be right back.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a flood nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Myers just had a very interesting debate on whether or not Pledge of Allegiance is constitutional or not, as long as the phrase Under God is within it, and the Supreme Court's probably going to tell us in due course. We want your idea about what you think about it, so let's take a look at our website, theverdict.tv. Go there, go under opinion polls and register your vote. And at the same time while you're there, tell us what other kind of a show you'd like to see us do, because we listen to you and we value your views. For Mick Cornett, I'm Kent Myers. Thanks for watching The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.